Hi everybody, this is our lesson 138. In this class, I will show you how to conjugate all the Spanish regular verbs into what we call the Modo Conditional Simple. This is the conditional verbal tense. But we have the simple conditional and the perfect conditional. Okay? The simple one uses no auxiliary verb, and the condicional perfecto uses an auxiliary verb, which is the verb haber. But we will leave that for our next class. So before we step into our topic, how to conjugate modo condicional simple in Spanish, let's quickly review. These will be all the tenses that I will show you how to conjugate in the following classes, okay? We will see modo indicativo, and we will also see the tiempos de subjuntivo or modo subjuntivo, okay? So in total, we will see 22 different Spanish conjugations. Let's begin with our modo condicional simple. We said before that Spanish verbs are classified into three big groups. The first group of Spanish verbs are those that end with the letters AR, right? The Spanish verbs that end in ar. This is the bigger group, the biggest group, and it's also the group that has less irregular verbs. Let's use the regular verb hablar from the first group. Hablar, or to speak. Example of modo condicional simple: yo hablaría, I would speak. So as you can see, the modo condicional simple, or the simple conditional, shows a hypothetical situation, right? I would do something, right? If, okay? So it would translate perfectly well in English with I would and the verb. So here we have another example. Si me sintiera mejor, hablaría más. If I felt better, I would speak more, right? So the verb hablaría, that word hablaría, is the verb hablar in conditional tense, okay, in condicional simple. So let's begin with the first person of the singular, with the first subject pronoun I, or yo. Yo hablaría, I would speak. Tú hablarías, you would speak. Él, or ella, or usted hablaría. Nosotros hablaríamos. Vosotros hablaríais. Ustedes hablarían. And ellos hablarían. Vosotros and ustedes mean the same thing. It is you, plural. But vosotros is a subject pronoun used in Spain, and ustedes is the subject pronoun that is used in Latin America. And you can see that although they mean the same thing, they conjugate differently, okay? Vosotros hablaríais, ustedes hablarían. And ustedes and ellos, although they mean different things, because the first one means you plural and the second one means they, however, they conjugate the same always. Remember also that usted is the formal you, and we use it when we address somebody much older than us, or somebody that with a certain status that requires us to keep some respectful distance, or also when we talk to somebody we are unrelated to, we are unacquainted to, okay? For example, when we meet somebody in the street, or at a shop, or when we are buying or working and we address customers or whoever formally, right? Remember, Spanish is a formal language, unlike English where everybody is addressed as you, okay? So let's continue with our second group of verbs, the second classification of Spanish verbs, that is the verbs that end in er, verbs that end in er. We'll take as an example the verb comer, or the verb to eat. Example, yo comería, or I would eat, right? We are still conjugating in modo condicional simple. Another example, si me sintiera mejor, comería más. If I felt better, I would eat more. Si means if, right? If I felt better is si me sintiera mejor. Remember, mejor is better, right? We saw that when we learned comparative and superlative, okay? Comería would be the condicional simple in this case. See how the ending of the verbs is in color red, right? And in blue we have the root of the verb which stays unchanged, okay? As with all the regular verbs. So we begin with I. Yo comería. Tú comerías. Él comería. Or ella, or usted comería. Nosotros comeríamos. Vosotros comeríais. Ustedes comerían. Ellos comerían, for they would eat. Remember that what is in red, the ending is what remains, right? Whenever we want to conjugate any verb of this group of verbs that end in er, right? We would just change the root of the verb depending on which is the verb we want to conjugate, and we add this ending that is in color red, okay? And there we will have the conjugation of the modo condicional simple. So let's end our class with our last group of verbs, the verbs that end in ir or ir. Verb vivir will be our example to work. Vivir means to live. So we would say, yo viviría, or I would live. Si comiera más sano, viviría más. If I ate healthier, I would live longer, right? Si comiera means if I ate. Más sano means more healthy or healthier. Viviría más means I would live more or I would live longer, okay? So here, viviría is the verb vivir in modo condicional simple. So we say, yo viviría, tú vivirías, él or ella or usted viviría, nosotros viviríamos, vosotros viviríais, ustedes vivirían, and ellos vivirían, or they would live. So this is how we conjugate the modo condicional simple in Spanish, okay? So you can practice with any other regular verb in Spanish, okay? You would just replace the root of this verb, right? In this case, vivir, viv, and you will replace it with the root of any other verb you want to conjugate. And with this same ending, you would be conjugating any regular verb in Spanish, okay? So we have conjugated in Modo Conditional Simple for the verbs that end in AR, the verbs that end in ER, and the verbs that end in IR. In the next class, I will show you how to conjugate in the Modo Conditional Perfecto. Okay? So, I'll see you then. Goodbye. Hi, this is our lesson 139. In this class, I will show you the Modo Condicional Perfecto in Spanish. In the previous class, I showed you Modo Condicional Simple, or the simple conditional tense. This one, Condicional Perfecto, or Condicional Compuesto, or perfect or compound, is another conditional tense, but this time you will see that we use an auxiliary verb, okay? In Spanish conjugations, whenever you see the word perfecto in the name of the tense, that means that there is an auxiliary verb involved. But before we step into our topic, let's briefly see all the different Spanish tenses that we will be seeing and learning in due time, okay? So this list here, this first page, these are the verbs, the tenses of the Indicativo, and here we have the tenses of the Subjuntivo, okay? All these form a group of 22 PowerPoint video lessons that I will be introducing with in order to show you and to teach you all the conjugations in Spanish for all the regular verbs, right? We'll be classifying them. We will be dividing them into the 3 groups of Spanish verbs, right? And we will begin with the verbs that end in the letters AR. Okay, remember that Spanish verbs are classified into 3 groups: the verbs that end in ar, the verbs that end in er, and the verbs that end in ir. Okay, the first group, the ones that end in AR, is the biggest of the groups, and it's also the one that has less irregular verbs, right? So let's begin with this one, and we'll choose the verb hablar as an example of a regular verb of this group. Hablar means to speak. So an example using the modo condicional perfecto is yo habría hablado. I would have spoken, right? This is what we call the modo condicional perfecto. I would have spoken is modo condicional perfecto. Yo habría hablado. Here we have a slightly more complex sentence where you can see the use of this conditional tense. Si me hubiera sentido mejor, habría hablado más. Si me hubiera sentido mejor, habría hablado más. If I had felt better, I would have spoken more, right? So, I would have spoken more is modo condicional perfecto. Habría hablado más, right? So, here you can see that we use modo condicional perfecto when we are referring to something that would have happened if certain hypothetical situation came true, okay? So let's begin with the first subject pronoun with the pronoun I or yo. Yo habría hablado. Tú habrías hablado. Él habría hablado. O ella o usted habría hablado. Nosotros habríamos hablado. Vosotros habríais hablado, for you would have spoken. Ustedes habrían hablado. Also, you would have spoken. Ellos habrían hablado. They would have spoken. So, see how vosotros and ustedes mean the same thing. They are synonyms. They both mean you plural. But vosotros is the pronoun that is used in Spain, and ustedes is the pronoun that is used in Latin America. And although they mean the same thing, you can see that the conjugation is different. Vosotros habríais hablado and ustedes habrían hablado. Actually, ustedes conjugates exactly the same as the pronoun ellos or they, right? And take a look at the subject pronoun usted. Usted is the formal you, right? Tú would be the informal you, and usted is the formal you. In Spanish, we said that Spanish is a formal language, and we use usted whenever we address somebody that is much older than us, or somebody with certain status that requires that we keep a respectful distance, right? Or also when we are talking to somebody we are unrelated to or unacquainted with, and then we do not know that person, so we address that person as usted, okay? For example, if we are talking to somebody in the street or to a customer, or we go shopping, there in Spanish we better use the pronoun usted instead of you, instead of tú, right? So you can see that the root of the verb is in blue and the ending is in red, right? So if you want to conjugate any verb, you just replace the root of the verb with whatever verb you want to conjugate, and you add the ending that is in red. And here in this case, since we are using an auxiliary verb, you can see that only the auxiliary verb changes the conjugation, right? And here the auxiliary verb that we use is the verb haber. So let's now pass to the second group of Spanish verbs. These are the verbs that end in er or er. We will take the verb comer or to eat as an example to conjugate, okay? Example, yo habría comido. I would have eaten. Si me hubiera sentido mejor, habría comido más. If I had felt better, I would have eaten more. Si me hubiera sentido mejor, if I had felt better, habría comido más. I would have eaten more. Here we have an example of modo condicional perfecto using the verb comer or to eat. Yo habría comido. I would have eaten. Tú habrías comido. You would have eaten. Él habría comido. He would have eaten. Nosotros habríamos comido. We would have eaten. Vosotros habríais comido. You would have eaten. Ustedes habrían hablado. Ustedes habrían comido. You would have eaten. So here we should have used the verb comido, the verb comer, instead of the verb hablar, okay? And our last example is ellos habrían comido, or they would have eaten, okay? So this is the conjugation of the verb comer in the modo condicional perfecto. So now let's see the last group of verbs, the verbs that end in ir, and this is the smallest of the three groups, and it's also the group that has more irregular verbs. But let's practice with a regular verb, that is the verb vivir, or to live. Example, yo habría vivido, or I would have lived. I sometimes say yo or yo, right? Most of the Spanish-speaking countries say yo. Since I come from Uruguay, we say yo, but that doesn't mind. You can say yo or yo. So, we were missing the third group of verbs, right? The verbs that end in IR. So, we will conjugate the verb vivir, or the verb to live, right? Yo habría vivido, or I would have lived. So here we have a more complex example. Si hubiera comido más sano, habría vivido más. If he had eaten healthier, he would have lived longer. See how here the he, right, at the beginning of the sentence, in Spanish, we are omitting the subject pronoun he, right, or él. That is because, as I said before, in Spanish, it is grammatically correct to omit the subject pronouns whenever there is a verb, right? Because the conjugation of the verb already gives us a hint regarding who is the subject, right? So, although hubiera can actually imply that the subject is I, or that the subject is he or she, or even if we are, it can be usted, because remember that the formal you, usted, conjugates as he or as she, right? Nevertheless, although there can be this kind of doubt, because it can be more than one chance of a subject pronoun that is implied here. Nevertheless, this is grammatically correct, okay? And it is through the context that we can know who is a subject. So, si hubiera comido más sano would be if he had eaten healthier, or also if I had eaten healthier, or if you, formal you, had eaten healthier. Habría vivido más. He would have lived longer, or whoever is the subject here, okay? So, let's begin with I. Yo habría vivido. I would have lived. Tú habrías vivido. You would have lived. Él habría vivido. He would have lived. Or ella habría vivido. She would have lived. Or usted habría vivido. You would have lived. And here we are talking to somebody. This is the formal you, okay? This is the case when we talk to somebody that is much older than us, or somebody that requires us to address him respectfully, okay? Nosotros habríamos vivido. We would have lived. Vosotros habríais vivido. You would have lived. Ustedes habrían vivido. You would have lived. And ellos habrían vivido. They would have lived. Hi there, students. This is our lesson 140, and in this class I will show you how to conjugate the verbs in Pretérito Perfecto del Indicativo. This would be in English the past perfect, okay? For example, I have gone, I have eaten, okay? Past perfect. In Spanish, the name of this tense is called Pretérito Perfecto del Indicativo, or just Pretérito Perfecto. Indicativo or Modo Indicativo is one of the two huge or big classifications of conjugation tenses, okay? In this page, we can see the all the verbs of the modo indicativo. Actually, I think I'm missing one, right? And in this next page, the modo subjuntivo that has 6 more tenses. And in this set of 22 PowerPoint video lessons, I will introduce you to all these 22 conjugation tenses of Spanish. Okay, so we will learn how to conjugate all the regular verbs in Spanish, right? And we will divide that into the 3 classifications of Spanish verbs. So let's begin with the first classification of verbs. These are the verbs that end in AR, right? The letters AR. This is the first of the 3 groups of verbs, and we will choose as an example the verb hablar, or the verb to speak, hablar. So you can see in blue, that is the root of the verb, and in red, those last 2 letters are the ending that indicates what group this verb belongs to, okay? The first group, the verbs that end in AR. So, this is an example of the tense pretérito perfecto del indicativo. Yo he hablado. Yo he hablado, I have spoken, okay? And same as in English, we would use the verb to have as an auxiliary verb, right? I have spoken. In Spanish, we use the verb haber, that means to have or to be, okay? So we will begin with the first person, okay, or the first subject pronoun, that is the person I. Yo he hablado. Tú has hablado. Él or ella or usted ha hablado. Nosotros hemos hablado. Vosotros habéis hablado. Ustedes han hablado. Ellos han hablado. Same as in English, you can see that whenever there is an auxiliary verb involved, it's only the auxiliary verb that changes the conjugation, okay? So here you can see that from one subject pronoun to another, the only thing that changes is the auxiliary verb haber, okay? While the verb to speak, okay, that is in gerundio here, sorry, it's in participio pasado, it says past particle. This remains the same for all the persons or for all the subject pronouns, okay? Hablado, 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 okay? Okay, remember also that usted means you, but it is the formal you. And vosotros and ustedes are synonyms. They mean you plural, okay? Let's continue with the second group of verbs in Spanish. These are the verbs that end with the letters ER. And we will choose as an example the verb comer. Comer means to eat. Example, yo he comido. I have eaten. We are still using the auxiliary verb haber. So we say, yo he comido, or I have eaten. Tú has comido. You have eaten. Él ha comido. He has eaten. Or ella ha comido. She has eaten. Or usted ha comido. You have eaten. Usted is you, formal you. Nosotros hemos comido. We have eaten. Vosotros habéis comido. You have eaten, you plural. Ustedes han comido. Also, you have eaten, but this is the you plural, the form used in Latin America. And ellos han comido. They have eaten. Now let's end with the third and last group of Spanish verbs. These are the verbs that end in IR, right? And this is the smallest of the three groups and the one that has more irregular verbs. So let's choose the regular verb vivir, right, to conjugate. Vivir means to live. Example, yo he vivido. I have lived. We are still using the auxiliary verb haber. So we say, yo he vivido. Tú has vivido. Él or ella or usted ha vivido. Nosotros hemos vivido. Vosotros habéis vivido. Ustedes han vivido. Ellos han vivido. So note how vosotros and ustedes, although they mean the same thing, one is used in Spain, the other one is used in Latin America. However, their conjugation changes, and ustedes always conjugates the same as ellos, okay, as they. Always, I mean for all the verbs, whether regular or irregular, and for all the verbal tenses. Always ustedes and ellos conjugate exactly the same. The same as usted and él or ella, okay? Those three always conjugate the same, although usted means actually you, the formal you. So this is the end of our lesson 140, and so keep looking for my more recent lessons, because I will be posting new lessons with more Spanish conjugation tenses, okay? So we can see the 22 different Spanish verbal tenses. Hi there. This is our lesson 141. In this class, I will show you the pretérito pluscuamperfecto del indicativo, or simply pretérito pluscuamperfecto. This is the name of this conjugation tense in Spanish, and although the long name is quite intimidating, nevertheless, the English language has this same tense. For example, I had gone, okay? I had eaten. This would be the pretérito pluscuamperfecto del indicativo, okay? So let's, before we get into the topic, let's see all the different tenses of the modo indicativo, okay? And although we are not actually seeing them in the same order that I have written them here, okay? But we will see them all in due time. You will learn how to conjugate all the regular verbs in Spanish into all the 22 tenses that we have in Spanish, okay? So let's begin with the first group of verbs in Spanish. This is the verbs that end in AR, right? Verbs of the group that end in AR. We'll choose as an example the verb hablar, or to speak. One example of pretérito pluscuamperfecto is yo había hablado. This means I had spoken. Another example, a bit more complex, is cuando llegué a casa, él ya había hablado con todos. Cuando llegué a casa, él ya había hablado con todos. This means when I arrived home, he had already spoken with everybody or to everybody, okay? So here, had spoken is pretérito pluscuamperfecto, or había hablado, right? Already is it corresponds to the word ya, the y and the a. This means already in Spanish, right? And we can omit this word if we want. It doesn't change the meaning. Okay, let's start. Oh, and we are using the auxiliary verb haber. Same as in English, we use the verb to have, right? When we say I had spoken, in Spanish we use the verb haber. And the same as in English, what changes from conjugating for one person a subject pronoun to another is the auxiliary verb. And the verb to speak or hablar remains the same for all the persons, all the different persons. You can see here, yo había hablado, tú habías hablado, él había hablado, nosotros habíamos hablado, vosotros habíais hablado, ustedes habían hablado, ellos habían hablado. So remember, vosotros and ustedes are synonyms, and usted means you, but it is the formal way of addressing somebody we are talking to, okay? And Spanish is a formal language, so we address somebody as usted when it is somebody much older than us or somebody with certain status that requires us to keep a respectful distance, or also when we are talking to somebody we do not know or we are unacquainted with, okay? Somebody in the street, or we go out shopping, or a customer, etc. Okay? Let's continue with the second group of Spanish verbs, the verbs that end in er. We choose verb comer as an example to conjugate. Comer means to eat. Example, yo había comido. I had eaten. Cuando llegué a casa, él ya había comido. When I arrived home, he had already eaten. Here, had eaten is pretérito pluscuamperfecto. In Spanish, it is había comido. We are still using the auxiliary verb haber. So we say, yo había comido. I had eaten. Tú habías comido. You had eaten. Él había comido, or ella había comido, for she had eaten, or usted había comido, for you had eaten, you, formal you. Nosotros habíamos comido, we had eaten. Vosotros habíais comido, you had eaten, you plural. Ustedes habían comido, you had eaten, you plural. And ellos habían comido, they had eaten. So now let's finish with the third and last classification of Spanish verbs. This is the verbs that end in IR or ir. Example, this is a regular verb of this third group, the verb vivir. Vivir means to live. Example, yo había vivido. I had lived. Él había vivido 10 años en esa casa. This means he had lived 10 years in that house, or for 10 years in that house, okay? Había vivido or had lived would be the pretérito pluscuamperfecto. So you can see here when it is that we use the pretérito pluscuamperfecto, okay? If you think of the English tense, I had lived, you can see when it applies, when we have to use the Preterito Pluscuamperfecto. We are still using verb haber as auxiliary verb or verbo auxiliar. Yo había vivido. I had lived. Tú habías vivido. You had lived. Él or ella or usted había vivido. For he or she or you had lived. Nosotros habíamos vivido. We had lived. Vosotros habíais vivido. You had lived. Plural you. Ustedes habían vivido. You had lived. Again, the plural you. And ellos habían vivido. They had lived. So you can see here how only the auxiliary verb changes, right? It's the only one that is conjugated for every single subject pronoun, okay? And the verb vivir, or whatever verb we want to conjugate, remains the same, right? Vivido, 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 always. Only see how the ending for the second and third groups is ido, right? I-D-O or I-D-O. And for the first group, it is ado, A-D-O or A-D-O, okay? So the ending changes whether it is the first group or second and third groups of verbs. In our class 142, I will teach you the pretérito anterior del indicativo. This conjugation tense in Spanish is one of the several conjugations of the past. Pretérito anterior can be conjugated as I was or I have been, right? However, in Spanish, I'll show you when it is used or when it was used, because pretérito anterior, although it still exists in Spanish, it has actually been replaced in everyday conversation for pretérito indefinido or simple past, or for pretérito pluscuamperfecto that we have already seen in a previous lesson. So, when do we actually still use the pretérito anterior? Actually, in old ancient literature or poetry, or sometimes in legal books, okay? So, it still exists, but it is very rarely used. So, let's begin. Before we get into the topic, here you can see all the different conjugations of the modo indicativo. Some of these we have already learned, and some others we will learn in our next lessons. Plus these 6 tenses of the modo subjuntivo, okay? In total, I counted 22 verbal tenses that I will be teaching you at the end of these, once we finish all these 22 PowerPoint video lessons. So let's begin with our first group of Spanish verbs, that is the verbs that end with the letters AR, okay? We know that the Spanish verbs are classified into 3 big groups: the ones that end in ar, the ones that end in er, and the ones that end in ir. And each of those 3 groups has its different rules of conjugation. So when we learn how to conjugate verbs into a specific verbal tense, we have to learn how to conjugate this tense into each of these 3 groups. So let's begin with the first group, that is the biggest of the 3, and it's also the one that has less irregular verbs. We will choose the verb hablar, or to speak, as an example to conjugate. Here's an example, a typical example using the pretérito anterior, so you can see when it is used, okay? Yo hube hablado. This means I spoke, or I had spoken, right? But the pretérito anterior is used for indicating something that happened immediately before something else, okay? So the pretérito anterior is used for indicating something that happened immediately before something else. So to understand this better, you can see the example I will show you right now. Apenas hube hablado con él, se enfureció y se fue. Apenas hube hablado con él, se enfureció y se fue. Okay, this sentence can be divided in two parts, or two phases, or two different moments, right, in the past. One moment is, first let's translate it into English. This means, as soon as I spoke with him, he got mad and left, right? We can divide this into two moments in the past. As soon as I spoke with him, and the other moment is, he got mad and left. And we see that although both are things that happened in the past, one happened immediately before the other one, right? But immediately before, not much before. So which one happened before? I spoke with him, right? But the words as soon as mean that this happened immediately before, right? So almost at the same time. What happened later is he got mad and left. So this past that happened immediately before is what we conjugate in pretérito anterior. Look at the words in Spanish. Apenas hube hablado con él. Hube hablado is the conjugation of the verb hablar in pretérito anterior. As you can see, we are using the auxiliary verb haber, right? That's why hube hablado, we have two verbs. Hube, which is the auxiliary verb that goes conjugated, and later hablado, that comes from the verb hablar, or to speak. So you will also see this if in everyday conversation we try to express this same idea, we'll probably use simple past or the pretérito pluscuamperfecto, right? However, this would be the pure or original way of saying this in Spanish, right? But that has, with time, been replaced by these other verbs. So let's see, here you can see we're using the verb haber as auxiliary verb, and here we will see how to conjugate verb hablar into each of the subject pronouns, okay? Remember that usted conjugates the same as él or ella, but usted means you, the formal way of addressing you or tú. And vosotros and ustedes are synonyms, but they conjugate differently, right? Vosotros is a subject pronoun that is used in Spain, and ustedes is the one that is used in Latin America. So let's begin. Yo hube hablado. Tú hubiste hablado. Él hubo hablado, or ella or usted hubo hablado. Nosotros hubimos hablado. Vosotros hubisteis hablado. Ustedes hubieron hablado. Ellos hubieron hablado. If we want to conjugate another regular verb of the first group, we replace the root of that verb with the root of this verb hablar, right? That is what is in blue. And what remains is the auxiliary verb, of course, and the ending right? The ending for this tense, that is what is marked in red. Now let's pass to the second group of verbs, the verbs that end with er. And we choose as an example the verb comer, or to eat. Here's our example. Yo hube comido. I ate or I had eaten, right? It's used for indicating something that happened immediately before something else. Apenas hube comido eso, me empecé a sentir mal. Apenas hube comido eso, me empecé a sentir mal. This means, as soon as I had eaten that, I began feeling sick. Right? So here we can see we have two different moments that happened in the past, and one is immediately before the other. Right? There we use the pretérito anterior. Hube comido is pretérito anterior. We are using the auxiliary verb haber. That means to have or to be. Of course, same as in English, the auxiliary verb is the one that goes conjugated, okay? You can see that here. Yo hube comido. Tú hubiste comido. Él or ella or usted hubo comido. Nosotros hubimos comido. Vosotros hubisteis comido. Ustedes hubieron comido. Ellos hubieron comido. Okay? Here you can see how the only one that is so here you can see how the only verb that is conjugated, that means the only one that changes its conjugation from one person or from one subject pronoun to the other, is the auxiliary verb, okay? The verb haber, hube, hubiste, hubo, right? While the verb that we want to conjugate, in this case the verb comer or to eat, remains the same, okay? Comido, comido, comido. Now let's pass to the last and third group of verbs, right? These are the verbs that end in ir or ir. This is the group of verbs that has more irregular verbs. However, we will choose a regular verb to conjugate here as an example, the verb vivir, that means to live. Yo hube vivido. Yo hube vivido. This means I lived or I had lived. It is used, the pretérito anterior is used for indicating something that happened immediately before something else. Here's our example. Se mudó apenas hubo vivido un año entero en esa casa. Again. Se mudó apenas hubo vivido un año entero en esa casa. He moved as soon as he had lived one full year in that house. Okay? Here we can see there are two different moments that happened in the past. However, one moment is happened immediately before the other one, right? In this case, he moved as soon as he had lived one full year in that house. So what comes immediately before? He had lived one full year in that house, right? Immediately after comes he moved. Okay? So we can see here that we use the pretérito anterior for the first part of the sentence, okay? For what came immediately after. You can see here, se mudó apenas hubo vivido. Sorry, I said wrong. We use the pretérito anterior for what happened immediately before. You can see this in Spanish. Se mudó means he moved, right? Apenas means as soon as. And here we have the other part of the sentence. Hubo vivido un año entero en esa casa. He had lived 1 full year in that house, right? So, hubo vivido is the pretérito anterior for the verb vivir. So here you can see when and how the pretérito anterior is used. But remember that in nowadays conversation and even writing, we usually replace the pretérito anterior with either simple past or Pret.Pluscuamperfecto. Okay, pretérito anterior would be perfectly correct, but perhaps it is too academic, and that's why today it's mainly used for poetry and some legal texts. Here you can see we're still using the auxiliary verb haber. Let's begin. Yo hube vivido. Tú hubiste vivido. Él hubo vivido. Or ella hubo vivido. Or usted hubo vivido. Nosotros hubimos vivido. Vosotros hubisteis vivido. Ustedes hubieron vivido. Ellos hubieron vivido. So, these are the 3 groups of Spanish verbs, right? The ones that end in ar, ones that end in er, and the ones that end in ir. We have conjugated the verbs in pretérito anterior for each of these 3 groups of verbs, right? So, with this we end our lesson 142. And remember, if you have any doubts or questions, you can send them to me via my channel in YouTube or through my blog, and it will be my pleasure to answer your doubts or any kind of questions. So I hope I see you next class. Goodbye. Hi guys. In our lesson 143, I will teach you the futuro perfecto del indicativo. This is one of the several future tenses that we have in Spanish, but unlike the simple future that we have already seen, in this future we have in the sentence 2 different moments in the future, but one is or it will happen immediately before the other one, right? If you remember our previous lesson when I taught the pretérito anterior, we spoke of a sentence that has 2 different moments in the past where one happened immediately before the other one. This is similar but in the future. One happens immediately before the other moment, although they are both in the future. But I will show you that with an example very soon. Before we step into the topic, you can see all the different tenses that we have in Spanish, and we will actually learn all these, right? Now we are in Futuro Perfecto, although we haven't followed the same order we have in this page, okay? So this page is for the tenses that we call Modo Indicativo. And this other page shows us the 6 tenses of the modo or tiempos de subjuntivo, right? In total, I think we have 22 tenses because I prepared 22 different lessons to teach you all the different tenses in Spanish. So let's begin with the verbs of the first group, that is the verbs that end with the letters AR, okay? This is the first group of Spanish verbs and the biggest group also. One example of this group is the verb hablar, or to speak, and we will use this verb to conjugate. Futuro perfecto then. Example, yo habré hablado. This means I will have spoken, okay? Here we have a sentence where we can understand, we can see when and how this tense is applied, okay? Listen well. Para cuando llegues a casa, yo ya habré hablado con todos. Again, para cuando llegues a casa, yo ya habré hablado con todos. This means, by the time you get home, I will have already spoken with everybody. By the time you get home, I will have already spoken with everybody. So we have a sentence that has two different moments in the future, right? But one will happen immediately before the other one. Look at this. By the time you get home, that is one. I will have already spoken with everybody. That is the other moment in the future. So both are in the future, but which one comes immediately before? I will have already spoken with everybody, right? The word already shows us that this has already happened or will have already happened by the time you get home, okay? So this second part, the one that will happen immediately before, there's when we use the futuro perfecto. In Spanish, you can see it here. Yo ya habré hablado con todos, or yo ya habré hablado con todos, okay? The futuro perfecto, you can see it in these words. Habré hablado, right? Habré is the auxiliary verb, and hablado is the verb hablar, or to speak. Here you can see we will use the auxiliary verb haber. That means to have or to be. So, beginning with I. Yo habré hablado. Tú habrás hablado. Él habrá hablado. Or ella habrá hablado. Or usted habrá hablado. Nosotros habremos hablado. Vosotros habréis hablado. Ustedes habrán hablado. Ellos habrán hablado. So please note here how ustedes and ellos always conjugate the same, right? Although ellos means they and ustedes means you plural, same as vosotros, right? However, vosotros has a different conjugation, although it means the same thing as ustedes. Vosotros is used in Spain and ustedes is used in Latin America, okay? Now, usted. Usted is the formal subject pronoun that is used for you or tú. However, the tú is informal or friendly, and usted is respectful or formal. Remember that Spanish is a formal language. Now we will continue with the second group of Spanish verbs, the second classification. This is the group of verbs that end with the letters ER. And our example will be using the verb comer. Comer means to eat. Yo habré comido. I will have eaten. Here's our sentence, our example sentence. Para cuando llegues a casa, yo ya habré comido. Para cuando llegues a casa, yo ya habré comido. By the time you get home, I will have already eaten. So here you can identify the two different moments in the future. By the time you get home is one, and the other one is I will have already eaten. Which one happened immediately before the other? The second one, right? I will have already eaten. The word already shows us that this one has happened immediately before the other one, right? So here's when where we use the futuro perfecto. You can see it here in Spanish. Yo ya habré comido. Habré comido. So para cuando llegues means for when you arrive. A casa is to home, right? Yo is I. Ya means already. Habré comido. I will have already eaten, right? So, yo habré comido. Tú habrás comido. Él or ella or usted habrá comido. Nosotros habremos comido. Vosotros habréis comido. Ustedes habrán comido. Ellos habrán comido. So you can see here how the ending of the verb comer, here it is comido, changes when compared with the previous verb, when we conjugated the verb hablar, right? For hablar, we added the ending ado, A-D-O, or A-D-O. And for comer, we added the ending I-D-O, ido, or I-D-O. This is because the first one, hablar, belonged to the first group of verbs, the ones that ended in AR. And this one belongs to the second group of verbs, the ones that that end with ER, right? So the ending, right, or the rule, the conjugation rule changes slightly, right? Now let's pass to our third and last classification of Spanish verbs. That is the ones that end with the letters IR. And our example will be the verb vivir, or to live. Yo habré vivido. I will have lived. And this is our example sentence. Para cuando muera, yo ya habré vivido bastante. I wrote the word yo, that is the subject pronoun I, between brackets because in Spanish we always can omit the subject pronoun, right? Unless it adds any additional information that is really indispensable for understanding the meaning of the sentence, right? So here we can and we usually omit it here. So I will read it again, omitting the... So let's read the sentence again. Para cuando muera, ya habré vivido bastante. Para cuando muera would be by the time I die. Ya habré vivido bastante. I will have already lived a lot. Ya is already. Habré vivido is I will have lived. Bastante is a lot. So here you can also identify the two different moments in the sentence, right? Both moments belong to the future, but one will happen immediately before the other, right? By the time I die is one moment in the future. I will have already lived a lot. This is the other moment in the future, but the word already tells us that this will happen immediately before the first part, okay? So there's that we use the futuro perfecto. You can see here in the Spanish sentence, habré vivido is conjugated in futuro perfecto, right? Habré is the auxiliary verb, vivido would be the verb vivir. Because in futuro perfecto we have to use an auxiliary verb, the verb haber. So here we can see how to conjugate. Yo habré vivido, for I will have lived. Tú habrás vivido. You will have lived. Él habrá vivido. He will have lived. Or ella habrá vivido. She will have lived. Or usted habrá vivido. You will have lived. You, the formal you. Nosotros habremos vivido. We will have lived. Vosotros habréis vivido. You will have lived. You plural. Ustedes habrán vivido. You will have lived. And ellos habrán vivido. They will have lived. So here you can see when and how we use the futuro perfecto, right? Or perfect future. And also here you can see how we conjugate this for all the Spanish verbs, okay? I said in these lessons that these rules apply only for the regular verbs. However, these these tenses or these conjugations where we are using an auxiliary verb, these apply for all the Spanish verbs, the regulars and the irregulars. Why? Because in these, where we are using an auxiliary verb, as here with the verb haber, what we conjugate is the auxiliary verb, right? Then the verb itself, right, remains always the same, vivido, 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 just with the right ending, okay? So I would tell you that this conjugation can apply to all the Spanish verbs, regulars and irregulars. So this is the end of our lesson 143, and remember, if you have any doubts or any questions, you can send them to me via my YouTube channel or through my blog, and it will be my pleasure to answer any questions you have. So I hope that I see you in my next lesson 144. Goodbye. Hi guys. In our lesson 144, I will teach you the past simple continuous in Spanish. Okay? This conjugation is one of the several conjugations in the past, and we will begin conjugating the first group of Spanish verbs, right? And you'll see how and when this conjugation tense is used. So let's begin with our first group of verbs, the first of three Spanish classifications for verbs, right? These are the verbs that end with the letters AR. Let's use the verb hablar, or verb to speak, as an example to conjugate the past simple continuous, okay? Hablar is a regular verb of the first group. Here's an example, look. Yo estaba hablando. It means I was speaking, right? So I was speaking, I was eating, I was doing. This is the past simple continuous, and this is the tense that I will show you how to conjugate right now in Spanish, okay? The use and application of this tense is exactly the same as in English, so it shouldn't be complicated to determine when and how to use it, okay? I will just show you how it is conjugated. It is simple, look at this. We will use the auxiliary verb estar, right? Same as in English, we use the verb to be as auxiliary verb for the past simple continuous, right? For example, I was speaking. Was is a verb to be, and it is the auxiliary verb. In Spanish, we use the verb estar. Yo estaba hablando. Tú estabas hablando. Él estaba hablando, or ella estaba hablando, or usted estaba hablando. Nosotros estábamos hablando. Vosotros estabais hablando. Ustedes estaban hablando. Ellos estaban hablando. So, if you want to conjugate any other Spanish verb, right, what remains the same is the auxiliary verb, right, conjugated for always for the proper person, and also the ending of the verb remains the same, right? So that is what we can see here in red. However, see that this ending is for the verbs of the first group of verbs, the verbs that end in AR. Okay, So if we want to use another verb from this group of verbs, we only replace the root of this verb for the root of any other verb we want to conjugate. In this case, the part of the verb habl, right? H-A-B-L, that is the root of the verb hablar. If we want to conjugate the verb caminar, that means to walk, we strip out the ending ar and we have camin. And that's what we put in instead of the root of this verb. All the rest remains the same, and there we have the conjugation of any verb we want. Okay? So now let's continue with the second group of verbs, the verbs that end with er. And now you will see how these verbs are conjugated into the past simple continuous. Verb comer, or to eat. Yo estaba comiendo. I was eating. We are still using the auxiliary verb estar, or to be. So we have here, yo estaba comiendo. I was eating. Tú estabas comiendo. You were eating. Él estaba comiendo. He was eating. Ella estaba comiendo. She was eating. Usted estaba comiendo. You were eating. Remember, usted is you, but it is the formal you or the respectful you, okay? Nosotros estábamos comiendo. We were eating. Vosotros estabais comiendo. You were eating. Ustedes estaban comiendo. You were eating. Ellos estaban comiendo. They were eating. So this tense here, this rule can be applied for regular verbs and also for irregular verbs. Why? Because in this case, since this tense uses an auxiliary verb, the verb estar, what is conjugated is the verb estar, the auxiliary verb, right? So since the verb we conjugate remains unchanged only with this ending that is in red, then actually we can use this same rule for regulars and irregular verbs, okay? So now let's end the lesson with the last group of Spanish verbs, the verbs that end with the letters IR, ir. For example, the verb vivir, or to live. Yo estaba viviendo. I was living. We are still using the verb estar as auxiliary verb. Yo estaba viviendo. Tú estabas viviendo. Él estaba viviendo. Nosotros estábamos viviendo. Vosotros estabais viviendo. Ustedes estaban viviendo. Ellos estaban viviendo. So note here how vosotros and ustedes are synonyms and the conjugation is different. I will always keep repeating this because both are okay, both are all right, but depending where in which country you are, you can hear one or another. If you're in Spain, people will speak using vosotros, and if you're in Latin America, people will speak using ustedes, okay? And of course, the proper conjugation for each one of these. However, if you feel more confident using vosotros or ustedes, it's okay if you use either of these in whatever country you happen to be, whatever Spanish-speaking country, okay? Because both are academically correct and will be understood anywhere, right? So don't worry about that. So this is the end of our lesson 144, and please send me any comments or questions or doubts that you may have, so I can help you answering your questions, and it will be my pleasure. So I see you soon. Hi guys. In our lesson 145, I will teach you the future continuous in Spanish. So what is the future continuous? For example, I will be speaking, I will be eating, I will be walking. In Spanish we say, yo estaré hablando, yo estaré comiendo, yo estaré caminando, right? The future continuous in Spanish is exactly the same, so I don't need to explain when and how to use it, right? But I will show you here how to conjugate the future continuous in Spanish, okay? So, as usual, we will begin with the first group of Spanish verbs. We classify the Spanish verbs in 3 different groups, and each group has its rules for conjugating its verbs, right? So we have the first group with the verbs that end in ar, second group with the verbs that end in er, and the third group are the verbs that end with the letters ir or ir. So let's begin with the first group of verbs, that is the biggest of the 3 groups and the one that has less irregular verbs, okay? And we will choose the verb hablar as a typical regular verb of this classification, okay? Hablar means to speak. So, as an example, we say, yo estaré hablando. I will be speaking. We use the auxiliary verb estar, right? Estaré hablando. Estaré is a conjugation of the verb estar. Same as in English, will be, okay? We're using the auxiliary verb to be for this tense, okay? And in Spanish, since what goes conjugated, what changes from one pronoun to the other is the auxiliary verb, then we can actually use this rule for regular verbs and irregular verbs, okay? You will see right now why. We'll begin with the first subject pronoun, I. Yo estaré hablando. I will be speaking. Tú estarás hablando. You will be speaking. Él estará hablando. He will be speaking. Or ella estará hablando. She will be speaking. Usted estará hablando. You will be speaking. Remember that usted means you, but tú is the informal or friendly you, and tú is the informal or friendly you, and usted is the formal or respectful you, okay? Spanish is a formal language, and we use the formal you, right? The usted when we address somebody that is much older than us, or somebody that has a status that requires some respectful distance or special respect, or also when we address somebody that we do not know, right? Like somebody in the street or a customer, etc. Nosotros estaremos hablando. We will be speaking. Vosotros estaréis hablando. You will be speaking. Ustedes estarán hablando. You will be speaking. Ellos estarán hablando. They will be speaking. Now let's pass to our second classification of Spanish verbs, the verbs that end with the letters ER. Example, the verb comer, or to eat. Comer, you can see that it ends with the letters ER. That's why the ending is written in red. And those 2 last letters indicate what group the verb belongs to. In blue, what remains after stripping out the ending is the root of the verb, okay? The root of the verb, you can see here that remains unchanged. Example, yo estaré comiendo. I will be eating. We are using the auxiliary verb estar. Yo estaré comiendo. Tú estarás comiendo. Él estará comiendo. Nosotros estaremos comiendo. Vosotros estaréis comiendo. Ustedes estarán comiendo. Ellos estarán comiendo. So you can see how what changes is the auxiliary verb, the conjugation, okay? And the verb we are conjugating, the verb comer, remains always the same here. Comiendo, 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 okay? So, of course, the ending yendo is different for this group than it is for the first group, okay? For the first group, the verbs that end with ar, the ending was ando, hablando, hablando. And for this second group, as well as for the next group, the third group of verbs, the ending is yendo, right? Yendo, comiendo, comiendo, comiendo. So have that in mind and remember the right ending for each one of the three big groups of verbs. So now let's end with the third and last group of verbs, the verbs that end with ir. Example, verb vivir, to live. Yo estaré viviendo. I will be living. We are still using the verb estar as the auxiliary verb. Yo estaré viviendo. Tú estarás viviendo. Él estará viviendo. Nosotros estaremos viviendo. Vosotros estaréis viviendo. Ustedes estarán viviendo. Ellos estarán viviendo. So you can see here the ending, what is colored in red. The ending is the same for the second and for the third group of verbs, right? The one that is different is the first one. Here it is yendo. In the first group it is ando. Okay? So this rule applies to all the Spanish verbs. Okay? You just need to determine by looking at the ending of the verb, those are the last two letters of the verb in infinitive. You have to determine what group the verb belongs to, okay? And then you conjugate it appropriately, okay? According to these rules that I have shown you in this PowerPoint video lesson. So this is the end of our lesson 145. This is also the end of our lessons where I'm showing you the Modo Indicativo. And in the next lessons, I will start teaching you the Modo Subjuntivo, right? Modo Subjuntivo has 6 more verbal tenses or conjugations. Okay, so I will, I will teach you those other 6 conjugations, and then we will finish with all the different tenses that we have in Spanish. So if you have any questions or any doubts, you can send them to me. You can submit them through my YouTube channel or through my blog. You can go to the description of the video and there you can find my blog written. So it will be my pleasure to answer any questions you may have. So I see you in our next lesson. Goodbye. In our lesson 146, I will teach you the modo subjuntivo or subjunctive mode. This is a less used tense in Spanish, okay? So these are a bit more advanced conjugations, but still many of these tenses are quite a bit used in Spanish, mainly to express situations that are hypothetical or desired, or to be ultra polite when we ask or request something from somebody. So in the previous lessons, we saw the modo indicativo, right? Those are the most typical verbal conjugations of Spanish, right? Like the simple past, simple present, present continuous, future, right? All those are part of the modo indicativo. And we saw 15 or 16, I think we saw 16 conjugation tenses of the modo indicativo, okay? So this is the list. I think I'm still missing one. So these are the tenses that we have already seen. Yes, all this is modo indicativo. Now, however, we will see the modo subjuntivo, right? And modo subjuntivo has 6 new conjugations or 6 new tenses. So it has its own presente or present tense, pretérito perfecto o antepresente. It has its pretérito imperfecto o pretérito. It has its pluscuamperfecto o antepretérito. It also has its simple future or future, and its futuro perfecto or antefuturo. Okay. However, since some of these names are the same as the names of some tenses from the modo indicativo, so when the correct thing when we talk about tense is to say the name of the tense and then to specify whether it is from the modo indicativo or modo subjuntivo. For example, futuro simple or simple future, right? Both the modo indicativo and the modo subjuntivo, they have a simple future. So when we talk of it, we say either futuro simple del modo subjuntivo or futuro simple del modo indicativo, right? And that way there is no confusion. So now let's start seeing the first conjugation of the modo subjuntivo, right? We will learn the presente del modo subjuntivo, or present tense of the subjunctive mode. So let me repeat again, when do we use the modo subjuntivo? The modo subjuntivo is used to express non-real situations. For example, expected or desired situations, or possible or hypothetical scenarios. Okay? So Spanish verbs, as you well know, are divided into 3 big categories, right? The verbs that end with the letters AR, the verbs that end with the letters ER, and the verbs that end with the letters IR. Each one of those groups of verbs has its own rules, right? That's why we learn separately how to conjugate for each one of those groups. So we will begin with the first group, and we will take the verb hablar, or the verb to speak, as an example to translate into the presente del subjuntivo. Okay? Our example is es correcto que yo hable. It is correct that I speak. Okay? So here, why do we use a modo subjuntivo? Because here there is not actually a real situation, because here in this statement it's correct that I speak, or es correcto que yo hable. Nowhere it is confirmed that I have spoken, right? Or that I will speak. I'm just saying that it is correct that I speak. So there is not a factual situation, okay? That's why this is one of the examples, or one of the cases where we use the modo subjuntivo. In this case, presente del modo subjuntivo. Hable, the verb hable is conjugated in presente del subjuntivo. Que, you see the word que that translates as that in English. que is a word that usually goes in this conjugation tense, okay? So here you have another example. Quiero que hables más. I want you to speak more. Or I want that you speak more. In Spanish, we use the word que. Okay, that means that. I want that you speak more. So you can see here how we use the word que in these sentences in presente del modo subjuntivo. Okay? In the first sentence, the verb is hable because the subject pronoun is I, yo. In the second sentence, it's hables. Why? Because the subject is you, tú. Okay? Okay, here we will begin with the first person, with I. Yo hable. Tú hables. Él hable, or ella hable, or usted hable. Nosotros hablemos. Vosotros habléis. Ustedes hablen. Ellos hablen. Or we can also say que yo hable, que tú hables, que él hable, or ella, or usted hable, que nosotros hablemos, que vosotros habléis, que ustedes hablen, que ellos hablen. As you see, the word que, that means that, is used in these sentences. So here you can see the pronoun usted. It conjugates the same as he or she. However, usted means you. Okay, but the difference with tú is that tú is the informal or friendly you, and usted is the informal or respectful you. And remember, Spanish is a formal language. Vosotros and ustedes, they are both the plural you. And vosotros is the pronoun that is used in Spain, while ustedes is a pronoun that is used in Latin America. So now let's jump into the second group of verbs, right? The second category. Those are the verbs that end with the letters ER. Our example is the verb comer, or to eat. Here's a sentence we can see as an example. Es correcto que yo coma. It's correct that I eat. Okay? Es correcto que yo coma. Or another example, quiero que comas más. Quiero que comas más. I want you to eat more. Or I want that you eat more. The word que, as you can see here too, it means that, and it's accompanying the sentences that are in presente del modo subjuntivo. Ojalá que llueva. Hopefully it rains. You see, there is an expression of desire, of hope or wish. Ojalá que llueva. Now let's conjugate the verb comer for all the persons or subject pronouns. Yo coma. I eat. Tú comas. You eat. Él coma. He eat. Or that, he eats, or that he eats. Or ella coma, or usted coma. Nosotros comamos. Vosotros comáis. Ustedes coman. And ellos coman. Or we can also say que yo coma, that I eat. Que tú comas, that you eat. Que él or ella or que usted coma, that he or that she or that you eat. Que nosotros comamos, that we eat. Que nosotros comamos. That means that we eat. Que vosotros comáis. That you eat. Que ustedes coman. Also that you eat. And que ellos coman. That they eat. Now we will end the lesson with the last and third classification of Spanish verbs, the verbs that end with the letters IR, the smallest of the three categories and the one that has more irregular verbs. We will choose the verb vivir to conjugate, okay? Vivir is a regular verb of the third group. Vivir means to live. Example, es correcto que yo viva bien. Es correcto que yo viva bien. It's correct that I live well. Another example. Quiero que vivas más. I want you to live longer. Or I want that you live longer, okay? So these are two examples using the presente del modo subjuntivo. Now let's see how it conjugates you for all the pronouns. Yo viva, or que yo viva. Tú vivas, or que tú vivas. Él viva, or ella viva, or usted viva. Or que él viva, que ella viva, que usted viva. Nosotros vivamos, or que nosotros vivamos. Vosotros viváis, or que vosotros viváis. Ustedes vivan, or que ustedes vivan. Ellos vivan, que ellos vivan. So here you can see the third classification of Spanish verbs, the verbs that end with the letters IR, or in Spanish, IR. Okay, you can see in color red that is the ending of the verb for this conjugation tense, and in blue we have the root of the verb. So whatever regular verb we want to conjugate, we just replace the root of the verb vivir that is here, and you put the root of any other verb you want to conjugate, right? The ending will remain the same for each of these persons, right, or subject pronouns. So that's how you can conjugate any verb you want into the presente del modo subjuntivo. So if you have any questions, any doubts, remember you can send them to me via my YouTube channel, or you can submit them through the blog, right? And it will be my pleasure to reply any questions that you may have. So I see you in the next class. Goodbye. Hi guys, this is our lesson 147, and in this class I will teach you how to conjugate the Spanish regular verbs, all of them, into the pretérito imperfecto del modo subjuntivo. Right? Before learning the modo subjuntivo, we saw 16 lessons where we learned how to conjugate all the different conjugation tenses of the modo indicativo. Right? Modo indicativo is the most frequent, the most used conjugation tenses, okay? But also we have the modo subjuntivo that is formed of 6 conjugation tenses, right? And the modo subjuntivo is used to express non-real situations, for example, expected or desired situations, or possible or hypothetical scenarios, okay? So the modo subjuntivo usually is used to express non-real or non-factual situations. Here you can see the names of the 6 different conjugation tenses of the modo subjuntivo, and you can see that these names also exist in the modo indicativo, right? So we have these names, for example, Futuro Simple or simple future, or Presente, the present tense, right? These names, we can find this a tense with this name in the modo subjuntivo and another one in the modo indicativo. So the correct thing is whenever we refer to a conjugation tense would be to say presente del modo subjuntivo or presente del modo indicativo. However, since usually we mostly speak using the modo indicativo, when we refer to the modo indicativo, we just say presente or simple present or simple future, and by default it is assumed that we are referring to the modo indicativo. And whenever we want to refer to the modo subjuntivo or subjunctive mode, we specifically mention it, right? Like, for example, we say presente del modo subjuntivo or futuro simple del modo subjuntivo, okay? Okay, now let's get into the topic and let's start conjugating in the pretérito imperfecto del modo subjuntivo. We will begin with the first classification of Spanish verbs, the verbs that end with the letters AR. Example, the verb hablar, or to speak. This is a regular verb of the first category. Pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. Example, el jefe necesitaría que hablases alemán. El jefe necesitaría que hablases alemán. The word hablases that is underlined is pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. Okay? Here you can see the translation is the boss would need you to speak German. Alemán means German, jefe means boss. Okay? Necesitaría means would need, right? So, el jefe necesitaría que hablases alemán. Here, the verb hablases is in pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. Another example. Has aceptado el puesto como si hablaras alemán bien. You have accepted the job as if you spoke German well. Has aceptado el puesto means you have accepted the job or the position. Como si is as if. Hablaras alemán bien. You spoke German well. So, hablaras here is modo subjuntivo, right? Pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. But you can see that there are two different conjugations of the pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. Hablases and hablaras. And that's true. This tense has two conjugations. It's strange, right? So, one or another we use depending on the situation. So, you can look at the situation here and see when we use hablases, when we use hablaras. Both are conjugated for the second person of the singular, right? And both are pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. Let's see how it conjugates for all the persons. Before, let's see one more example. Él se alegra de que lo ayudaras. Él se alegra de que lo ayudaras. He is glad that you helped him. Okay? So here you can see that there are some words that indicate that we have to use the subjuntivo. Here you can see we are either using the words como si, as if, or the words que for that, okay? Let's see how it conjugates for the different subject pronouns. Yo hablara or yo hablase. Tú hablaras or tú hablases. Él, ella, usted hablara. Or él, ella, usted hablase. Nosotros habláramos. O nosotros hablásemos. Vosotros hablarais. O vosotros hablaseis. Ustedes hablaran. O ustedes hablasen. Ellos hablaran. O ellos hablasen. Now let's step into the second classification of verbs. The verbs of the group of verbs that end with the letters ER. Here are some examples. A tu madre le gustaría que comieses bien. A tu madre le gustaría que comieses bien. Your mother would like you to eat well. Comieses is in pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. You can see here that this is not a factual situation, right? It's expressing a desire, but it's not talking of something that is happening or that happened or that will happen. That is the trademark of the modo subjuntivo, the subjunctive mode. Has escogido ese restaurante como si comieras ese tipo de comida. Has escogido ese restaurante como si comieras ese tipo de comida. You have chosen that restaurant as if you ate that type of food. So you see that either the word que or the word as if, those here you can see are signs that we are going to use the modo subjuntivo, okay? Has escogido means you have chosen. Ese restaurante is that restaurant. Como si, as if, comieras ese tipo de comida. You ate that type of food. Our third example is, tu madre se alegra de que comieras toda la comida. Tu madre se alegra de que comieras toda la comida. Your mother is glad that you ate all your food. So comieras here is also pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. So let's conjugate for the subject pronouns in the plural and the singular. Yo comiera or yo comiese. Tú comieras or tú comieses. Él or ella or usted comiera. Él or ella or usted comiese. Nosotros comiéramos. Nosotros comiésemos. Vosotros comierais. Vosotros comieseis. Ustedes comieran. Ustedes. Vosotros comierais. Vosotros comieseis. Ustedes comieran. Ustedes comiesen. Ellos comieran. Ellos comiesen. So you can see how these are two conjugations of the pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. Now let's see the third and last group of Spanish verbs, the verbs that end with IR, okay? We will use the verb vivir, that means to live, as a verb that we will conjugate into the pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. Vivir is a regular verb of the third group. Examples: los que te quieren desearían que vivieses muchos años. Those who love you would like you to live for many years. Los que te quieren means those who love you. Desearían, would like, que vivieses, you to live or that you live, muchos años, many years. Has comprado esos muebles enormes como si vivieras en una casa grande. You have bought that huge furniture as if you lived in a big house. Has comprado esos muebles enormes is you have bought that huge furniture. Como si vivieras en una casa enorme, as if you lived in a big house. So vivieras here is the verb that is in pretérito imperfecto del subjuntivo. Our last example is nos alegramos de que vivieras para contarlo. Nos alegramos de que vivieras para contarlo. We are glad that you lived to tell the story. Or we are glad that you survived to tell the story, okay? So nos alegramos is we are glad or we rejoice. Actually, it literally means we rejoice. De que vivieras, that you lived, para contarlo, to tell it or to tell the story, okay? So let's conjugate the verb vivir. Yo viviera. Yo viviese. Tú vivieras. Tú vivieses. Él viviera. Or ella viviera. Or usted viviera. Viviese. Or ella viviese. Usted viviese. Nosotros viviéramos. Nosotros viviésemos. Vosotros vivierais. Vosotros vivieseis. Ustedes vivieran. Ustedes viviesen. Ellos vivieran. Or ellos viviesen. So this is the conjugation of the pretérito imperfecto del modo subjuntivo. I know it's not so clear as simple present or as simple future or simple past. It's not so simple to see, to determine when it is that we use it, right? Mainly it's not so evident for somebody that is learning Spanish. For somebody that has been raised speaking Spanish, this is more intuitive, right? But in some future lessons, after I finish showing all these conjugations, I will dedicate some lessons to show you examples where you can really determine correctly when it is and how that you use these conjugation tenses. So this is the end of our lesson 147, and remember, if you have any questions or doubts, you can send them to me via my YouTube channel or through my blog. Okay, so I see you soon. Goodbye.